Chapter 17. And yet our Herminia was a woman after all. Some 3 years later, when Harvey Kynaston came to visit her one day and told her he was really going to be married, what sudden thrill was this that passed through and through her? Her heart stood still. She was aware that she regretted the comparative loss of a very near and dear acquaintance. She knew she was quite wrong. It was the leaven of slavery. But these monopolist instincts, which have wrought more harm in the world we live in than fire or sword or pestilence or tempest, hardly die at all as yet in a few good men, and die fighting hard for life, even in the noblest women. She reasoned with herself against so hateful a feeling. Though she knew the truth, she found it hard to follow. No man, indeed, is truly civilized till he can say in all sincerity to every woman of all the women he loves, to every woman of all the women who love him, "Give me what you can of your love and of yourself, but never strive for my sake to deny any love, to strangle any impulse that pants for breath within you. Give me what you can while you can, without grudging, but the moment you feel you love me no more, don't pollute your own body by yielding it up to a man you have ceased to desire. Don't do injustice to your own prospective children by giving them a father whom you no longer respect or admire or yearn for. Guard your chastity well. Be mine as much as you will, as long as you will, to such extent as you will. But before all things be your own. Embrace and follow every instinct of pure love that nature, our mother, has imparted within you. No woman, in turn, is truly civilized till she can say to every man of all the men she loves, of all the men who love her, "Give me what you can of your love and of yourself. But don't think I am so vile and so selfish and so poor as to desire to monopolize you. Respect me enough never to give me your body without giving me your heart, never to make me the mother of children whom you desire not and love not." When men and women can say that alike, the world will be civilized. Until they can say it truly, the world will be, as now, a jarring battlefield for the monopolist instincts. Those jealous and odious instincts have been the bane of humanity. They have given us the stiletto, the morgue, the bowie knife. Our race must inevitably in the end outlive them. The test of man's plane in the scale of being is how far he has outlived them. They are surviving relics of the ape and tiger. But we must let the ape and tiger die. We must cease to be Calibans. We must begin to be human. Patriotism is one of the lowest vices which most often masquerades in false garb as a virtue. But what, after all, is patriotism? My country, right or wrong, and just because it is my country. This is clearly nothing more than collective selfishness. Often enough, indeed, it is not even collective. It means merely my business interests against the business interests of other people, and let the taxes of my fellow citizens pay to support them. At other times it means pure pride of race and pure lust of conquest. My country against other countries, my army and navy against other fighters, my right to annex unoccupied territory against the equal right of all other peoples, my power to oppress all weaker nationalities, all inferior races. It never means or can mean anything good or true. For if a cause be just, like Ireland's or once Italy's, then 'tis a good man's duty to espouse it with warmth, be it his own or another's. And if a cause be bad, then 'tis a good man's duty to oppose it, tooth and nail, irrespective of your patriotism. True, a good man will feel more sensitively anxious that strict justice should be done by the particular community of which chance has made him a component member than by any others. But then, people who feel acutely this joint responsibility of all the citizens to uphold the moral right are not praised as patriots, but reviled as unpatriotic. To urge that our own country should strive with all its might to be better, higher, purer, nobler, more generous than other countries, the only kind of patriotism worth a moment's thought in a righteous man's eyes, is accounted by most men both wicked and foolish. Then comes the monopolist instinct of property. That, on the face of it, is a baser and more sordid one. For patriotism at least can lay claim to some sort of delusive expansiveness beyond mere individual interest, whereas property stops short at the narrowest limits of personality. It is no longer us against the world, but me against my fellow citizens. It is the last word of the inter-civic war in its most hideous avatar. Look how it scars the fair face of our common country with its antisocial notice boards. Trespassers will be prosecuted. It says, in effect, this is my land. As I believe, God made it, but I have acquired it and tabooed it to myself for my own enjoyment. The grass on the wold grows green, but only for me. The mountains rise glorious in the morning sun. No foot of man, save mine and my gillies, shall tread them. The waterfalls leap white from the ledge in the glen. Avaunt there, non-possessors! Your eye shall never see them. For you, the muddy street. For me, miles of upland. All this is my own, and I choose to monopolize it. Or is it the capitalist? I will add field to field, he cries aloud, despite his own scripture. I will join railway to railway. I will juggle into my own hands all the instruments for the production of wealth that my cunning can lay hold of, and I will use them for my own purposes against producer and consumer alike with impartial egoism. Corn and coal shall lie in the hollow of my hand. I will enrich myself by making dear by craft the necessaries of life. The poor shall lack, that I may roll down fair streets in needless luxury. Let them starve and feed me. That temper, too, humanity must outlive. And those who are incapable of outliving it of themselves must be taught by stern lessons, as in the splendid uprising of the spirit of man in France, that their race has outstripped them. Next comes the monopoly of human life, the hideous wrong of slavery. That, thank goodness, is now gone. 'Twas the vilest of them all, the nakedest assertion of the monopolist platform. You live not for yourself, but wholly and solely for me. I disregard your claims to your own body and soul, and use you as my chattel. That worst form has died. It withered away before the moral indignation even of existing humanity. We have the satisfaction of seeing one dragon slain, of knowing that one monopolist instinct at least is now fairly bred out of us. Last, and hardest of all to eradicate in our midst, comes the monopoly of the human heart, which is known as marriage. Based upon the primitive habit of felling the woman with a blow, stunning her by repeated strokes of the club or spear, and dragging her off by the hair of her head as a slave to her captor's hut or rock shelter, this ugly and barbaric form of serfdom has come in our own time, by some strange caprice, to be regarded as of positively divine origin. The man says now to himself, "This woman is mine. Law and the Church have bestowed her on me. Mine for better, for worse, mine drunk or sober. If she ventures to have a heart or a will of her own, woe betide her. I have tabooed her for life. Let any other man touch her, let her so much as cast eyes on any other man to admire or desire him, and knife, dagger, or law court, they shall both of them answer for it. There you have, in all its native deformity, another monopolist instinct, the deepest seated of all, the grimmest, the most vindictive. She is not yours, says the moral philosopher of the new dispensation. She is her own, release her. The Turk hails his offending slave, sews her up in a sack, and casts her quick into the eddying Bosphorus. The Christian Englishman, with more lingering torture, sets spies on her life, drags what he thinks her shame before a prying court, and divorces her with contumely. All this is monopoly, and essentially slavery. Mankind must outlive it on its way up to civilization. And then the woman, thus taught by her lords, has begun to retort in these latter days by endeavouring to enslave the man in return. Unable to conceive the bare idea of freedom for both sexes alike, she seeks equality in an equal slavery. That she will never achieve. The future is to the free. We have transcended serfdom. Women shall henceforth be the equals of men, not by levelling down, but by levelling up; not by fettering the man, but by elevating, emancipating, unshackling the woman. All this Herminia knew well. All these things she turned over in her mind, by herself, on the evening of the day when Harvey Kynaston came to tell her of his approaching marriage. Why, then, did she feel it to some extent a disappointment? Why so flat at his happiness? Partly, she said to herself, because it is difficult to live down in a single generation the jealousies and distrusts engendered in our hearts by so many ages of harem life. But more still, she honestly believed, because it is hard to be a free soul in an enslaved community. No unit can wholly sever itself from the social organism of which it is a corpuscle. If all the world were like herself, her lot would have been different. Affection would have been free. Her yearnings for sympathy would have been filled to the full by Harvey Kynaston or some other. As it was, she had but that one little fraction of a man friend to solace her. To resign him altogether to another woman, leaving herself bankrupt of love, was indeed a bitter trial to her. Yet, for her principle's sake, and Dolly's, she never let Harvey Kynaston or his wife suspect it. As long as she lived, she was a true and earnest friend at all times to both of them. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18. Meanwhile, Dolores was growing up to woman's estate, and she was growing into a tall, a graceful, an exquisitely beautiful woman. Yet, in some ways, Herminia had reason to be dissatisfied with her daughter's development. Day by day she watched for signs of the expected apostolate. Was Dolores pressing forward to the mark for the prize of her high calling? Her mother half doubted it. Slowly and regretfully, as the growing girl approached the years when she might be expected to think for herself, Herminia began to perceive that the child of so many hopes, of so many aspirations, the child predestined to regenerate humanity, was thinking for herself, in a retrograde direction. Incredible as it seemed to Herminia, In the daughter of such a father and such a mother, Dolores's ideas, nay, worse, her ideals, were essentially commonplace. Not that she had much opportunity of imbibing commonplace opinions from any outside source. She redeveloped them from within by a pure effort of atavism. She had reverted to lower types. She had thrown back to the Philistine. Heredity of mental and moral qualities is a precarious matter. These things lie, as it were, on the topmost plane of character. They smack of the individual, and are therefore far less likely to persist in offspring than the deeper-seated and better-established peculiarities of the family, the clan, the race, or the species. They are idiosyncratic. Indeed, when we remember how greatly the mental and moral faculties differ from brother to brother, the product of the same two parental factors, can we wonder that they differ much more from father to son, the product of one like factor alone, diluted by the addition of a relatively unknown quality, the maternal influence? However this may be, at any rate, Dolores early began to strike out for herself all the most ordinary and stereotyped opinions of British respectability. It seemed as if they sprang up in her by unmitigated reversion. She had never heard in the society of her mother's lodgings any but the freest and most rational ideas, yet she herself seemed to hark back, of internal congruity, to the lower and vulgarer moral plane of her remoter ancestry. She showed her individuality only by evolving for herself all the threadbare platitudes of ordinary convention. Moreover, it is not parents who have most to do with moulding the sentiments and opinions of their children. From the beginning, Dolly thought better of the landlady's views and ideas than of her mother's. When she went to school, she considered the moral standpoint of the other girls a great deal more sensible than the moral standpoint of Herminia's attic. She accepted the beliefs and opinions of her schoolfellows because they were natural and congenial to her character. In short, she had what the world calls common sense. She revolted from the unpractical utopianism of her mother. From a very early age, indeed, this false note in Dolly had begun to make itself heard. While she was yet quite a child, Herminia noticed with a certain tender but shrinking regret that Dolly seemed to attach undue importance to the mere upholsteries and equipages of life, to rank, wealth, title, servants, carriages, jewellery. At first, to be sure, Herminia hoped this might prove but the passing foolishness of childhood. As Dolly grew up, however, it became clearer each day that the defect was in the grain, that Dolly's whole mind was incurably and congenitally aristocratic or snobbish. She had that mean admiration for birth, position, adventitious advantages, which is the mark of the beast in the essentially aristocratic or snobbish nature. She admired people because they were rich, because they were high-placed, because they were courted, because they were respected, not because they were good, because they were wise, because they were noble-natured, because they were respect-worthy. But even that was not all. In time, Herminia began to perceive with still profounder sorrow that Dolly had no spontaneous care or regard for righteousness. Right and wrong meant to her only what was usual and the opposite. She seemed incapable of considering the intrinsic nature of any act in itself, apart from the praise or blame meted out to it by society. In short, she was sunk in the same ineffable slough of moral darkness as the ordinary inhabitant of the morass of London. To Herminia, this slow discovery, as it dawned bit by bit upon her, put the final thorn in her crown of martyrdom. the child on whose education she had spent so much pains, the child whose success in the deep things of life was to atone for her own failure, the child who was born to be the apostle of freedom to her sisters in darkness, had turned out, in the most earnest essentials of character, a complete disappointment, and had ruined the last hope that bound her to existence. Bitterer trials remained. Herminia had acted through life to a great extent with the idea ever consciously present to her mind that she must answer to Dolly for every act and every feeling. She had done all she did with a deep sense of responsibility. Now it loomed by degrees upon her aching heart that Dolly's verdict would in almost every case be a hostile one. The daughter was growing old enough to question and criticise her mother's proceedings. She was beginning to understand that some mysterious difference marked off her own uncertain position in life from the solid position of the children who surrounded her, the children born under those special circumstances which alone the man-made law chooses to stamp with the seal of its recognition. Dolly's curiosity was shyly aroused as to her dead father's family. Herminia had done her best to prepare betimes for this inevitable result by setting before her child, as soon as she could understand it, the true moral doctrine as to the duties of parenthood. But Dolly's own development rendered all such steps futile. There is no more silly and persistent error than the belief of parents that they can influence to any appreciable extent the moral ideas and impulses of their children. These things have their springs in the bases of character. They are the flower of individuality, and they cannot be altered or affected after birth by the foolishness of preaching. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, you will find soon enough he will choose his own course for himself and depart from it. Already, when Dolly was a toddling little mite and met her mother's father in the church in Marylebone, it had struck her as odd that while they themselves were so poor and ill-clad, her grandpapa should be such a grand old gentleman of such a dignified aspect. As she grew older and older, and began to understand a little more the world she lived in, she wondered yet more profoundly how it could happen, if her grandpapa was indeed the very Reverend the Dean of Dunwich, that her mamma should be an outcast from her father's church, and scarcely well seen in the best carriage company. She had learnt that deans are rather grand people, almost as much so as admirals, that they wear shovel hats to distinguish them from the common ruck of rectors, that they lived in fine houses in a cathedral close, and that they drive in a victoria with a coachman in livery. So much essential knowledge of the Church of Christ she had gained for herself by personal observation, for facts like these were what interested Dolly. She couldn't understand, then, why she and her mother should live precariously in a very small attic, should never be visited by her mother's brothers, one of whom she knew to be a prebendary of Old Sarum, while the other she saw gazetted as a colonel of artillery, and should be totally ignored by her mother's sister Ermintrude, who lolled in a landau down the sunny side of Bond Street. At first, indeed, it only occurred to Dolly that her mother's extreme and advanced opinions had induced a social breach between herself and the orthodox members of her family. Even that Dolly resented. Why should mamma hold ideas of her own which shut her daughter out from the worldly advantages enjoyed to the full by the rest of her kindred? Dolly had no particular religious ideas, the subject didn't interest her. And besides, she thought the New Testament talked about rich and poor in much the same unpractical, nebulous way that mamma herself did. In fact, she regarded it with some veiled contempt as a rather sentimental, radical publication. But she considered, for all that it was probably true enough, as far as the facts and the theology went, and she couldn't understand why a person like mamma should cut herself off contumaciously from the rest of the world by presuming to disbelieve a body of doctrine which so many rich and well-gaitered bishops held worthy of credence. All stylish society accepted the tenets of the Church of England. But in time it began to occur to her that there might be some deeper and, as she herself would have said, more disgraceful reason for her mother's alienation from so respectable a family. For to Dolly, that was disgraceful which the world held to be so. Things in themselves, apart from the world's word, had for her no existence. Step by step, as she grew up to blushing womanhood, it began to strike her with surprise that her grandfather's name had been, like her own, Barton. "Did you marry your cousin, mamma?" she asked Herminia one day, quite suddenly. And Herminia, flushing scarlet at the unexpected question, the first with which Dolly had yet ventured to approach that dangerous quicksand, replied with a deadly thrill, "No, my darling. Why do you ask me?" "Because," Dolly answered, abashed, "I just wanted to know why your name should be Barton, the same as poor grandpapa's." Herminia didn't dare to say too much just then. "Your dear father," she answered low, "was not related to me in any way." Dolly accepted the tone as closing the discussion for the present. But the episode only strengthened her underlying sense of a mystery somewhere in the matter to unravel. In time, Herminia sent her child to a day school. Though she had always taught Dolly herself as well as she was able, she felt it a matter of duty, as her daughter grew up, to give her something more than the stray ends of time in a busy journalist's moments of leisure. At the school, where Dolly was received without question on Miss Smith-Water's recommendation, she found herself thrown much into the society of other girls, drawn for the most part from the narrowly mammon-worshipping ranks of London professional society. Here her native tendencies towards the real religion of England, the united worship of success and respectability, were encouraged to the utmost. But she noticed at times, with a shy shrinking, that some few of the girls had heard vague rumours about her mother as a most equivocal person who didn't accept all the current superstitions, and were curious to ask her questions as to her family and antecedents. Crimson with shame, Dolly parried such inquiries as best she could, but she longed all the more herself to pierce this dim mystery. Was it a runaway match? With the groom, perhaps, or the footman? Only the natural shamefacedness of a budding girl in prying into her mother's most domestic secrets prevented Dolores from asking Herminia some day point blank all about it. But she was gradually becoming aware that some strange atmosphere of doubt surrounded her birth and her mother's history. It filled her with sensitive fears and self-conscious hesitations. And if the truth must be told, Dolly never really returned her mother's profound affection. It is often so. The love which parents lavish upon their children, the children repay not to parents themselves, but to the next generation. Only when we become fathers or mothers in our turn do we learn what our fathers and mothers have done for us. Thus it was with Dolly. When once the first period of childish dependence was over, she regarded Herminia with a smouldering distrust and a secret dislike that concealed itself beneath a mask of unfelt caresses. In her heart of hearts, she owed her mother a grudge for not having put her in a position in life where she could drive in a carriage with a snarling pug and a clipped French poodle, like Aunt Ermintrude's children. She grew up smarting under a sullen sense of injustice, all the deeper because she was compelled to stifle it in the profoundest recesses of her own heart. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19. When Dolly was 17, a pink wild rose just unrolling its petals, a very great event occurred in her history. She received an invitation to go and stop with some friends in the country. The poor child's life had been, in a sense, so uneventful that the bare prospect of this visit filled her soul beforehand with tremulous anticipation. To be sure, Dolly Barton had always lived in the midmost centre of the movement in London. She had known authors, artists, socialists, the cream of our race. She had been brought up in close intercourse with the men and women who are engaged in revolutionising and remodelling humanity. But this very fact that she had always lived in the thick of things made a change to the thin of things only by so much the more delicious and enchanting. Not that Dolores had not seen a great deal, too, of the country. Poor as they were, her mother had taken her to cheap little seaside nooks for a week or two of each summer. She had made pilgrimages almost every Sunday in spring or autumn to Leith Hill or Maple Durham. She had even strained her scanty resources to the utmost to afford Dolly an occasional outing in the Ardennes or in Normandy. But what gave supreme importance to this coming visit was the special fact that Dolly was now for the first time in her life to find herself in society. Among the friends she had picked up at her Marylebone Day School were two West Country girls, private boarders of the headmistresses, who came from the neighbourhood of Combe Neville in Dorset. Their name was Compson, and their father was rector of their native village, Upcombe. Dolly liked them very much, and was proud of their acquaintance, because they were reckoned about the most distinguished pupils in the school, their mother being the niece of a local viscount. Among girls in middle-class London sets, even so remote a connection with the title-bearing classes is counted for a distinction. So when Winnie Compson asked Dolly to go and stop with her at her father's rectory during 3 whole weeks of the summer holidays, Dolly felt that now at last, by pure force of native worth, she was rising to her natural position in society. It flattered her that Winnie should select her for such an honour. The preparations for that visit cost Dolly some weeks of thought and effort. The occasion demanded it. She was afraid she had no frocks good enough for such a grand house as the Compsons. Grand was indeed a favourite epithet of Dolly's. She applied it impartially to everything which had to do, as she conceived, with the life of the propertied and privileged classes. It was a word at once of cherished and revered meaning, the shibboleth of her religion. It implied to her mind something remote and unapproachable, yet to be earnestly striven after with all the forces at her disposal. Even Herminia herself stretched a point in favour of an occasion which she could plainly see Dolly regarded as so important. She managed to indulge her darling in a couple of dainty new afternoon dresses, which touched for her soul the very utmost verge of allowable luxury. The materials were oriental, the cut was the dressmaker's, not home-built as usual. Dolly looked so brave in them, with her rich chestnut hair and her creamy complexion, a touch, Herminia thought, of her Italian birthplace, that the mother's full heart leapt up to look at her. It almost made Herminia wish she was rich and antisocial like the rich people, in order that she might be able to do ample justice to the exquisite grace of Dolly's unfolding figure. Tall, lissom, supple, clear of limb and light of footstep, she was indeed a girl any mother might have been proud of. On the day she left London, Herminia thought to herself she had never seen her child look so absolutely lovely. The unwonted union of blue eyes with that olive-grey skin gave a tinge of wayward shyness to her girlish beauty. The golden locks had ripened to nut brown, but still caught stray gleams of nestling sunlight. 'Twas with a foreboding regret that Herminia kissed Dolly on both peach-bloom cheeks at parting. She almost fancied her child must be slipping from her motherly grasp when she went off so blithely to visit these unknown friends away down in Dorsetshire. Yet Dolly had so few amusements of the sort young girls require that Herminia was overjoyed this opportunity should have come to her. She reproached herself not a little in her sensitive heart for even feeling sad at Dolly's joyous departure. Yet to Dolly it was a delight to escape from the atmosphere of Herminia's lodgings. Those calm heights chilled her. The Compsons' house was quite as grand in the reality as Dolly had imagined it. There was a manservant in a white tie to wait at table, and the family dressed every evening for dinner. Yet, much to her surprise, Dolly found from the first the grandeur did not in the least incommode her. On the contrary, she enjoyed it. She felt forthwith she was to the manor born. This was clearly the life she was intended by nature to live, and might actually have been living, she, the granddaughter of so grand a man as the late Dean of Dunwich, had it not been for poor mamma's ridiculous fancies. Mamma was so faddy. Before Dolly had spent 3 whole days at the rectory, she talked just as the Compsons did. She picked up, by pure instinct, the territorial slang of the county families. One would have thought, to hear her discourse, she had dressed for dinner every night of her life, and passed her days in the society of the beneficed clergy. But even that did not exhaust the charm of Upcombe for Dolly. For the first time in her life she saw something of men, real men with horses and dogs and guns, men who went out partridge shooting in the season and rode to hounds across country, not the pale abstractions of cultured humanity who attended the Fabian Society meetings or wrote things called articles in the London papers. Her mother's friends wore soft felt hats and limp woollen collars. These real men were richly clad in tweed suits and fine linen. Dolly was charmed with them all, but especially with one handsome and manly young fellow named Walter Bridges, the stepson and ward of a neighbouring parson. "How you talked with him at tennis to-day!" Winnie Compson said to her friend as they sat on the edge of Dolly's bed one evening. "He seemed quite taken with you." A pink spot of pleasure glowed on Dolly's round cheek to think that a real young man in good society, whom she met at so grand a house as the Compsons', should seem to be quite taken with her. "Who is he, Winnie?" she asked, trying to look less self-conscious. "He's extremely good-looking." "Oh, he's Mr. Hawkshaw's stepson over at Combe Mary," Winnie answered with a nod. "Mr. Hawkshaw's the vicar there till mamma's nephew is ready to take the living, what they call a warming pan. But Walter Bridges is Mrs. Hawkshaw's son by her first husband. Old Mr. Bridges was the squire of Combe Mary, and Walter's his only child. He's very well off. You might do worse, dear. He's considered quite a catch down in this part of the country." "How old is he?" Dolly asked, innocently enough, standing up by the bedside in her dainty white nightgown. But Winnie caught at her meaning with the preternatural sharpness of the girl brought up in immediate contact with the landed interest. "Oh, he's of age," she answered quickly, with a knowing nod. "He's come into the property. He has nobody on earth but himself to consult about his domestic arrangements." Dolly was young. Dolly was pretty. Dolly's smile won the world. Dolly was still at the sweetest and most susceptible of ages. Walter Brydges was well off. Walter Brydges was handsome. Walter Brydges had all the glamour of a landed estate and an Oxford education. He was a young Greek god in a Norfolk shooting jacket. Moreover, he was a really good and pleasant young fellow. What wonder, therefore, if before a week was out, Dolly was very really and seriously in love with him? And what wonder if Walter Brydges, in turn, caught by that maiden glance, was in love with Dolly? He had every excuse, for she was lithe and beautiful, and a joyous companion, besides being, as the lady's maid justly remarked, a perfect lady. One day, after Dolly had been a fortnight at Upcombe, the Compsons gave a picnic in the wild Combe undercliff. 'Tis a broken wall of chalk, tumbled picturesquely about in huge shattered masses, and deliciously overgrown with ferns and blackthorn and golden clusters of close-creeping rock-rose. Mazy paths thread tangled labyrinths of fallen rock, or wind round tall clumps of hollybush and bramble. They lighted their fire under the lee of one such buttress of broken cliff, whose summit was festooned with long sprays of clematis, or old man's beard, as the common West Country name expressively phrases it. Thistledown hovered on the basking air. There they sat and drank their tea, couched on beds of fern, or propped firm against the rock. And when tea was over, they wandered off, two and two, ostensibly for nothing, but really for the true business of the picnic, to afford the young men and maidens of the group some chance of enjoying, unspied, one another's society. Dolly and Walter Brydges strolled off by themselves towards the rocky shore. There Walter showed her where a brook bubbled clear from the fountainhead. By its brink blue veronicas grew, and tall yellow loosestrife, and tasselled purple heads of great English eupatry. Bending down to the stream, he picked a little bunch of forget-me-nots and handed them to her. Dolly pretended unconsciously to pull the dainty blossoms to pieces as she sat on the clay bank hard by and talked with him. "Is that how you treat my poor flowers?" Walter asked, looking askance at her. Dolly glanced down and drew back suddenly. "Oh, poor little things!" she cried, with a quick droop of her long lashes. "I wasn't thinking what I did." And she darted a shy glance at him. "If I'd remembered they were forget-me-nots, I don't think I could have done it." She looked so sweet and pure in her budding innocence, like a half-blown water-lily, that the young man, already more than 2/3 in love, was instantly captivated. "Because they were forget-me-nots, or because they were mine, Miss Barton?" he asked softly, all timorousness. "Perhaps a little of both," the girl answered, gazing down, and blushing at each word a still deeper crimson. The blush showed sweet on that translucent skin. Walter turned to her with a sudden impulse. "And what are you going to do with them now?" he inquired, holding his breath for joy and half-suppressed eagerness. Dolly hesitated a moment with genuine modesty. Then her liking for the well-knit young man overcame her. With a frightened smile, her hand stole to her bodice. She fixed them in her bosom. "Will that do?" she asked timidly. "Yes, that will do," the young man answered, bending forward and seizing her soft fingers in his own. "That will do very well. And, Miss Barton, Dolores, I take it as a sign you don't wholly dislike me." "I like you very much," Dolly answered in a low voice, pulling a rock rose from a cleft and tearing it nervously to pieces. "Do you love me, Dolly?" the young man insisted. Dolly turned her glance to him tenderly, then withdrew it in haste. "I think I might, in time," she answered very slowly. "Then you will be mine, mine, mine?" Walter cried in an ecstasy. Dolly bent her pretty head in reluctant assent, with a torrent of inner joy. The sun flashed in her chestnut hair. The triumph of that moment was to her inexpressible. But as for Walter Brydges, he seized the blushing face boldly in his two brown hands and imprinted upon it at once 3 respectful kisses. Then he drew back, half terrified at his own temerity. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20. From that day forth, it was understood at Upcombe that Dolly Barton was informally engaged to Walter Brydges. Their betrothal would be announced in the Morning Post. "We learn that a marriage has been arranged," and so forth, as soon as the chosen bride had returned to town and communicated the great news in person to her mother. For reasons of her own, Dolly preferred this delay. She didn't wish to write on the subject to Herminia. Would mamma go and spoil it all, she wondered. It would be just like her. The remaining week of her stay at the rectory was a golden dream of delight to Dolly. Beyond even the natural ecstasy of first love, the natural triumph of a brilliant engagement, what visions of untold splendour danced hourly, day and night, before her dazzled eyes! What masks of magnificence, county balls, garden parties! It was heaven to Dolly. She was going to be grander than her grandest daydream. Walter took her across one afternoon to Combe Mary, and introduced her in due form to his mother and his stepfather, who found the pink and white girl so very young, but saw no other grave fault in her. He even escorted her over the ancestral home of the masters of Combe Mary, in which they were both to live, and which the young squire had left vacant of set purpose till he found a wife to his mind to fill it. 'Twas the ideal crystallised. Rooks cawed from the high elms, ivy clambered to the gables, the tower of the village church closed the vista through the avenue. The cup of Dolly's happiness was full to the brim. She was to dwell in a manor house with livery servants of her own, and to dress for dinner every night of her existence. On the very last evening of her stay in Dorsetshire, Walter came round to see her. Mrs. Compson and the girls managed to keep discreetly out of the young people's way. The rector was in his study preparing his Sunday sermon, which arduous intellectual effort was supposed to engage his close attention for 5 hours or so weekly. Not a mouse interrupted. So Dolly and her lover had the field to themselves from 8 to 10 in the rectory drawing-room. From the first moment of Walter's entry, Dolly was dimly aware, womanlike, of something amiss, something altered in his manner. Not indeed that her lover was less affectionate or less tender than usual. If anything, he seemed rather more so. But his talk was embarrassed, preoccupied, spasmodic. He spoke by fits and starts, and seemed to hold back something. Dolly taxed him with it at last. Walter tried to put it off upon her approaching departure, but he was an honest young man, and so bad an actor that Dolly, with her keen feminine intuitions, at once detected him. "It's more than that," she said, all regret, leaning forward with a quick gathering moisture in her eye, for she really loved him. It's more than that, Walter. You've heard something somewhere that you don't want to tell me." Walter's colour changed at once. He was a man, and therefore but a poor dissembler. "Well, nothing very much," he admitted awkwardly. Dolly drew back like one stung. Her heart beat fast. "What have you heard?" she cried, trembling. "Walter, Walter, I love you. You must keep nothing back. Tell me now what it is. I can bear to hear it." The young man hesitated. "Only something my stepfather heard from a friend last night," he replied, floundering deeper and deeper. "Nothing at all about you, darling. Only, well, about your family." Dolly's face was red as fire. A lump rose in her throat. She started in horror. Then he had found out the truth. He had probed the mystery. "Something that makes you sorry you promised to marry me?" she cried aloud in her despair. Heaven faded before her eyes. What evil trick could mamma have played her? As she stood there that moment, proud, crimson, breathless, Walter Brydges would have married her if her father had been a tinker and her mother a gipsy girl. He drew her toward him tenderly. "No, darling," he cried, kissing her, for he was a chivalrous young man, as he understood chivalry, and to him it was indeed a most cruel blow to learn that his future wife was born out of lawful wedlock. "I'm proud of you. I love you. I worship the very ground your sweet feet tread on. Nothing on earth could make me anything but grateful and thankful for the gift of your love you're gracious enough to bestow on me." But Dolly drew back in alarm. Not on such terms as those. She too had her pride. She too had her chivalry. "No, no," she cried, shrinking. "I don't know what it is. I don't know what it means. But till I've gone home to London and asked about it from mother. Oh, Walter, we two are no longer engaged. You are free from your promise." She said it proudly. She said it bravely. She said it with womanly grace and dignity. Something of Herminia shone out in her that moment. No man should ever take her to the grandest home unless he took her at her full worth, pleased and proud to win her. Walter soothed and coaxed, but Dolores stood firm. Like a rock in the sea, no assault could move her. As things stood at present, she cried, they were no longer engaged. After she had seen her mother and talked it all over, she would write to him once more and tell him what she thought of it. And crimson to the fingertips with shame and modesty, she rushed from his presence up to her own dark bedroom. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21. Next morning early, Dolly left Combe Neville on her way to London. When she reached the station, Walter was on the platform with a bunch of white roses. He handed them to her deferentially as she took her seat in the third-class carriage. And so sobered was Dolly by this great misfortune that she forgot even to feel a passing pang of shame that Walter should see her travel in that humble fashion. "Remember," he whispered in her ear as the train steamed out, "we are still engaged. I hold you to your promise." And Dolly, blushing maidenly shame and distress, shook her head decisively. "Not now," she answered. "I must wait till I know the truth. It has always been kept from me, and now I will know it." She had not slept that night. All the way up to London she kept turning her doubt over. The more she thought of it, the deeper it galled her. Her wrath waxed bitter against Herminia for this evil turn she had wrought. The smouldering anger of years blazed forth at last. Had she blighted her daughter's life and spoiled so fair a future by obstinate adherence to those preposterous ideas of hers? Never in her life had Dolly loved her mother. At best she had felt towards her that contemptuous toleration which inferior minds often extend to higher ones. And now, why, she hated her. In London, as it happened, that very morning, Herminia, walking across Regent's Park, had fallen in with Harvey Kynaston, and their talk had turned upon this selfsame problem. "What will you do when she asks you about it, as she must, sooner or later?" the man inquired. And Herminia, smiling that serene, sweet smile of hers, made answer at once, without a second's hesitation. "I shall confess the whole truth to her." "But it might be so bad for her," Harvey Kynaston went on. And then he proceeded to bring up in detail casuistic objections on the score of a young girl's modesty, all of which fell flat on Herminia's more honest and consistent temperament. "I believe in the truth," she said simply, "and I'm never afraid of it. I don't think a lie, or even a suppression, can ever be good in the end for any one. The truth shall make you free. That one principle in life can guide one through everything." In the evening, when Dolly came home, her mother ran out proudly and affectionately to kiss her. But Dolly drew back her face with a gesture of displeasure, nay, almost of shrinking. "Not now, mother," she cried. "I have something to ask you about. Till I know the truth, I can never kiss you." Herminia's face turned deadly white. She knew it had come at last. But still she never flinched. "You shall hear the truth from me, darling," she said, with a gentle touch. "You have always heard it." They passed under the doorway and up the stairs in silence. As soon as they were in the sitting-room, Dolly fronted Herminia fiercely. "Mother!" she cried, with the air of a wild creature at bay. "Were you married to my father?" Herminia's cheek blanched, and her pale lips quivered as she nerved herself to answer. But she answered bravely, "No, darling, I was not. It has always been contrary to my principles to marry." "Your principles!" Dolores echoed in a tone of ineffable scorn. "Your principles! Your principles! All my life has been sacrificed to you and your principles." Then she turned on her madly once more. "And who was my father?" she burst out in her agony. Herminia never paused. She must tell her the truth. "Your father's name was Alan Merrick," she answered, steadying herself with one hand on the table. "He died at Perugia before you were born there. He was a son of Sir Anthony Merrick, the great doctor in Harley Street." The worst was out. Dolly stood still and gasped. Hot horror flooded her burning cheeks. Illegitimate! Illegitimate! Dishonoured from her birth! A mark for every cruel tongue to aim at! Born in shame and disgrace! And then to think what she might have been but for her mother's madness! The granddaughter of two such great men in their way as the Dean of Dunwich and Sir Anthony Merrick. She drew back, all aghast. Shame and agony held her. Something of maiden modesty burned bright in her cheek and down her very neck. Red waves coursed through her. How on earth after this could she face Walter Brydges? "Mother! Mother!" she broke out, sobbing after a moment's pause. "Oh, what have you done? What have you done? A cruel, cruel mother you have been to me. How can I ever forgive you?" Herminia gazed at her, appalled. It was a natural tragedy. There was no way out of it. She couldn't help seizing the thing at once in a lightning flash of sympathy, from Dolly's point of view, too. Quick womanly instinct made her heart bleed for her daughter's manifest shame and horror. "Dolly! Dolly!" the agonised mother cried, flinging herself upon her child's mercy, as it were. "Don't be hard on me! Don't be hard on me! My darling, how could I ever guess you would look at it like this? How could I ever guess my daughter and his would see things for herself in so different a light from the light we saw them in?" "You had no right to bring me into the world at all!" Dolly cried, growing fiercer as her mother grew more unhappy. "If you did, you should have put me on an equality with other people." "Dolly!" Herminia moaned, wringing her hands in her despair. "My child, my darling, how I have loved you! How I have watched over you! Your life has been for years the one thing I had to live for. I dreamed you would be just such another one as myself, equal with other people. Why, I thought I was giving you the noblest heritage living woman ever yet gave the child of her bosom. I thought you would be proud of it, as I myself would have been proud. I thought you would accept it as a glorious birthright, a supreme privilege. How could I foresee you would turn aside from your mother's creed? How could I anticipate you would be ashamed of being the first free-born woman ever begotten in England? 'Twas a blessing I meant to give you, and you have made a curse of it." "You have made a curse of it," Dolores answered, rising and glaring at her. "You have blighted my life for me. A good man and true was going to make me his wife. After this, how can I dare to palm myself off upon him?" She swept from the room. Though broken with sorrow, her step was resolute. Herminia followed her to her bedroom. There Dolly sat long on the edge of the bed, crying silently, silently, and rocking herself up and down like one mad with agony. At last, in one fierce burst, she relieved her burdened soul by pouring out to her mother the whole tale of her meeting with Walter Brydges. Though she hated her, she must tell her. Herminia listened with deep shame. It brought the colour back into her own pale cheek to think any man should deem he was performing an act of chivalrous self-devotion in marrying Herminia Barton's unlawful daughter, Alan Merrick's child, the child of so many hopes, the baby that was born to regenerate humanity. At last, in a dogged way, Dolly rose once more. She put on her hat and jacket. "Where are you going?" her mother asked, terrified. "I am going out," Dolores answered. "To the post, to telegraph to him." She worded her telegram briefly but proudly. "My mother has told me all. I understand your feeling. Our arrangement is annulled. Good-bye. You have been kind to me." An hour or two later, a return telegram came. Our engagement remains exactly as it was. Nothing is changed. I hold you to your promise. All tenderest messages. Letter follows." That answer calmed Dolly's mind a little. She began to think, after all, if Walter still wanted her, she loved him very much. She could hardly dismiss him. When she rose to go to bed, Herminia, very wistful, held out her white face to be kissed as usual. She held it out tentatively. Worlds trembled in the balance. But Dolly drew herself back with a look of offended dignity. "Never," she answered in a firm voice. "Never again while I live. You are not fit to receive a pure girl's kisses." And two women lay awake all that ensuing night, sobbing low on their pillows in the Marylebone lodging-house. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22. It was 9:30 next morning when the manservant at Sir Anthony Merrick's in Harley Street brought up to his master's room a plain handwritten card on which he read the name Dolores Barton. "Does the girl want to blackmail me?" Sir Anthony thought testily. The great doctor's old age was a lonely and a sordid one. He was close on 80 now, but still to this day he received his patients from 10 to 1, and closed his shrivelled hand with a clutch on their guineas. For whom nobody knew. Lady Merrick was long dead, his daughters were well married, and he had quarrelled with their husbands. Of his two younger sons, one had gone into the Fusiliers and been speared at Suakim, the other had broken his neck on a hunting field in Warwickshire. The old man lived alone and hugged his money bags. They were the one thing left for which he seemed to retain any human affection. So when he read Dolly's card, being by nature suspicious, he felt sure the child had called to see what she could get out of him. But when he descended to the consulting room with stern, set face, and saw a beautiful girl of 17 awaiting him, a tall, sunny-haired girl with Alan's own smile and Alan's own eyes, he grew suddenly aware of an unexpected interest. The sun went back on the dial of his life for 30 years or thereabouts, and Alan himself seemed to stand before him. Alan as he used to burst in for his holidays from Winchester. After all, this pink rosebud was his eldest son's only daughter. Chestnut hair, pearly teeth, she was Alan all over. Sir Anthony bowed his most respectful bow with old-fashioned courtesy. "And what can I do for you, young lady?" he asked in his best professional manner. "Grandfather," the girl broke out, blushing red to the ears, but saying it out none the less. "Grandfather, I'm your granddaughter, Dolores Barton." The old man bowed once more, a most deferential bow. Strange to say, when he saw her, this claim of blood pleased him. "So I see, my child," he answered. "And what do you want with me?" "I only knew it last night," Dolly went on, casting down those blue eyes in her shamefaced embarrassment. "And this morning I've come to implore your protection." "That's prompt," the old man replied, with a curious smile, half suspicious, half satisfied. "From whom, my little one?" And his hand caressed her shoulder. "From my mother," Dolly answered, blushing still deeper crimson. "From the mother who put this injustice upon me. From the mother who, by her own confession, might have given me an honourable birthright, like any one else's, and who cruelly refused to." The old man eyed her with a searching glance. "Then she hasn't brought you up in her own wild ideas?" he said. "She hasn't dinged them into you?"
"She has tried to," Dolly answered, "but I will have nothing to do with them. I hate her ideas and her friends and her faction."
Sir Anthony drew her forward and gave her a sudden kiss. Her spirit pleased him. "That's well, my child," he answered. "That's well for a beginning." Then Dolly, emboldened by his kindness, for in a moment somehow she had taken her grandfather's heart by assault, began to tell him how it had all come about, how she had received an offer from a most excellent young man at Combe Mary in Dorsetshire, very well connected, the squire of his parish, how she had accepted him with joy, how she loved him dearly, how this shadow intervened, how thereupon, for the first time, she had asked for and learned the horrid truth about her parentage, how she was stunned and appalled by it, how she could never again live under one roof with such a woman, and how she came to him for advice, for encouragement, for assistance. She flung herself on his mercy. Every word she spoke impressed Sir Anthony. This was no mere acting; the girl really meant it. Brought up in those hateful surroundings, innate purity of mind had preserved her innocent heart from the contagion of example. She spoke like a sensible, modest, healthy English maiden. She was indeed a granddaughter any man might be proud of. 'Twas clear as the sun in the London sky to Sir Anthony that she recoiled with horror from her mother's position. He sympathised with her and pitied her. Dolores, all blushes, lifted her eyelids and looked at him. Her grandfather drew her towards him with a smile of real tenderness, and unbending as none had seen him unbend before since Alan's death, told her all the sad history as he himself envisaged it. Dolores listened and shuddered. The old man was vanquished. He would have taken her once to himself, he said, if Herminia had permitted it. He would take her to himself now, if Dolores would come to him. As for Dolly, she lay sobbing and crying in Sir Anthony's arms, as though she had always known him. After all, he was her grandfather, nearer to her in heart and soul than her mother. And the butler could hardly conceal his surprise and amazement when, 3 minutes later, Sir Anthony rang the bell, and being discovered alone with a strange young lady in tears, made the unprecedented announcement that he would see no patients at all that morning, and was at home to nobody. But before Dolly left her new-found relation's house, it was all arranged between them. She was to come there at once as his adopted daughter, was to take and use the name of Merrick, was to see nothing more of that wicked woman, her mother, and was to be married in due time from Sir Anthony's house and under Sir Anthony's auspices to Walter Brydges. She wrote to Walter then and there from her grandfather's consulting room. Numb with shame as she was, she nerved her hand to write to him. In what most delicate language she could find, she let him plainly know who Sir Anthony was, and all else that had happened. But she added at the end one significant clause. "While my mother lives, dear Walter, I feel I can never marry you." End of chapter 22. Chapter 23. When she returned from Sir Anthony's to her mother's lodgings, she found Herminia, very pale, in the sitting-room, waiting for her. Her eyes were fixed on a cherished autotype of a Pinturicchia at Perugia, Alan's favourite picture. Out of her penury she had bought it. It represented the Madonna bending in worship over her divine child, and bore the inscription Quem genuit adoravit. Herminia loved that group. To her it was no mere emblem of a dying creed, but a type of the eternal religion of maternity. The mother adoring the child. 'Twas herself and Dolly. "Well?" Herminia said interrogatively, as her daughter entered, for she half feared the worst. "Well," Dolores answered in a defiant tone, blurting it out in sudden jerks, the rebellion of a lifetime finding vent at last. "I've been to my grandfather, my father's father, and I've told him everything, and it's all arranged, and I'm to take his name, and I'm to go and live with him." "Dolly!" the mother cried, and fell forward on the table with her face in her hands. "My child! My child! Are you going to leave me?" "It's quite time," Dolly answered in a sullen, stolid voice. "I can't stop here, of course, now I'm almost grown up and engaged to be married, associating any longer with such a woman as you have been. No right-minded girl who respected herself could do it." Herminia rose and faced her. Her white lips grew livid. She had counted on every element of her martyrdom save one, and this, the blackest and fiercest of all, had never even occurred to her. "Dolly!" she cried. "Oh, my daughter! You don't know what you do. You don't know how I've loved you. I've given up my life for you. I thought when you came to woman's estate, and learned what was right and what wrong, you would indeed rise up and call me blessed. And now, oh, Dolly, this last blow is too terrible. It will kill me, my darling. I can't go on outliving it." "You will," Dolly answered. "You're strong enough and wiry enough to outlive anything. But I wrote to Walter from Sir Anthony's this morning, and told him I would wait for him if I waited for ever. For of course, while you live, I couldn't think of marrying him. I couldn't think of burdening an honest man with such a mother-in-law as you are." Herminia could only utter the one word, "Dolly!" It was a heart-broken cry, the last despairing cry of a wounded and stricken creature. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24. That night Herminia Barton went up sadly to her own bedroom. It was the very last night that Dolores was to sleep under the same roof with her mother. On the morrow she meant to remove to Sir Anthony Merrick's. As soon as Herminia had closed the door, she sat down to her writing table and began to write. Her pen moved of itself, and this was her letter. "My darling daughter, by the time you read these words, I shall be no longer in the way to interfere with your perfect freedom of action. I had but one task left in life, to make you happy. Now I find I only stand in the way of that object, no reason remains why I should endure any longer the misfortune of living. My child, you must see, when you come to think it over at leisure, that all I ever did was done up to my lights to serve and bless you. I thought, by giving you the father and the birth I did, I was giving you the best any mother on earth had ever yet given her dearest daughter. I believe it still, but I see I should never succeed in making you feel it. Accept this reparation for all the wrong I may have done, all the mistakes I may have made. I sincerely and earnestly implore your forgiveness. I could not have had it while I lived. I beseech and pray you to grant me dead what you would never have been able to grant me living.
My darling, I thought you would grow up to feel as I did. I thought you would thank me for leading you to see such things as the blind world is incapable of seeing. There I made a mistake, and sorely am I punished for it. Don't visit it upon my head in your recollections when I can no longer defend myself. I set out in life with the earnest determination to be a martyr to the cause of truth and righteousness, as I myself understood them. But I didn't foresee this last pang of martyrdom. No soul can tell beforehand to what particular cross the blind chances of the universe will finally nail it. But I am ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is close at hand. I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith I started in life with. Nothing now remains for me but the crown of martyrdom. My darling, it is indeed a very bitter cup to me that you should wish me dead. But 'tis a small thing to die, above all for the sake of those we love. I die for you gladly, knowing that by doing so I can easily relieve my own dear little girl of one trouble in life, and make her course lie henceforth through smoother waters. Be happy, be happy. Good-bye, my Dolly. Your mother's love go forever through life with you. Burn this blurred note the moment you have read it. I enclose a more formal one, giving reasons for my act on other grounds, to be put in, if need be, at the coroner's inquest. Good night, my heart's darling. Your truly devoted and affectionate mother. Oh, Dolly, my Dolly, you never will know with what love I loved you. When she had finished that note and folded it reverently with kisses and tears, she wrote the second one in a firm hand for the formal evidence. Then she put on a fresh white dress, as pure as her own soul, like the one she had worn on the night of her self-made bridal with Alan Merrick. In her bosom she fastened 2 innocent white roses from Walter Bridges' bouquet, arranging them with studious care very daintily before her mirror. She was always a woman. Perhaps, she thought to herself, for her lover's sake, my Dolly will kiss them. When she finds them lying on her dead mother's breast, my Dolly may kiss them. Then she cried a few minutes very softly to herself, for no one can die without some little regret, some consciousness of the unique solemnity of the occasion. At last she rose and moved over to her desk. Out of it she took a small glass-stoppered file that a scientific friend had given her long ago for use in case of extreme emergency. It contained prussic acid. She poured the contents into a glass and drank it off. Then she lay upon her bed and waited for the only friend she had left in the world, with hands folded on her breast, like some saint of the Middle Ages. Not for nothing does blind fate vouchsafe such martyrs to humanity. From their graves shall spring glorious the church of the future. When Dolores came in next morning to say good-bye, she found her mother's body cold and stiff upon the bed, in a pure white dress, with 2 crushed white roses just peeping from her bodice. Herminia Barton's stainless soul had ceased to exist for ever. End of chapter 24, and end of The Woman Who Did, by Grant Allen.